And we are live with another episode of the Keeg Talks. Today, the Keeg Talks, the new history of the DC Universe, issue number 1. Now, normally, are we geek? Sure. Are we pop culture? Sure. Are we, talking about movies and TV shows? But it is rare that the Keeg Talks as a show is dedicated towards a single comic. So, I'm your host, Dimithri Pereira. If you are watching us live, you're watching us on youtube.com/The Keeg Show, or maybe twitch.tv/The Keeg Show, or listen to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. But, little backstory before I introduce my guests. We're here to talk about the new history of the DC Universe. It is a 4-part comic series that talks about everything in the DC Comics universe from the Big Bang to either current or maybe they go into the future. I'm not quite sure. But it's 4 issues going over all the continuity, and DC continuity has, been a little bit, in flux for the past 50 years. And so now they're finally putting their foot down, and they're telling us what that continuity is. And it's big enough for us to do an episode on each of these issues. That's the goal. This is issue number 1. And yes, I'm Dimithri, but our guests, we got Drew, aka Drew Deficit. What's up, Drew?
Hey, hello. How are you?
Doing good. We're here on a Sunday, and that's a little bit different.
I know. It feels weird. My whole week feels off now.
I'm sorry. Is
It's
your
okay.
your body's like what?
It's mostly the fact that I don't have work. So like that just makes all my days feel really weird.
Your body is like, is it Thursday? Is it comic talk day?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
I woke up today legitimately not knowing what day it was.
yeah. It's funny because both the guests today are guests on Comic Talk, which is every Thursday, where we talk about the new comic releases. So a couple days ago, and the episode is out podcast wise and on YouTube. A couple days ago, we had this guest and also Virgo Blade. Virgo Blade's not on this episode, where we talked about all the comics, including new history of the DC Universe, but we just touched on it a little bit because I knew I wanted to dedicate a whole episode. We got Jack Kelly, aka the Film Field. He was on this week's Comic Talk and now on the Keeg Talks. Jack, what's up, man?
Not too much. I'm excited for this one. I'm a big DC history guy, so this is right up my alley, and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, well, first of all, anyone out there, like, comment, subscribe, follow, do your thing. But the question for you guys is, I was really excited when this was released. Are you guys really big into DC Comics continuity? Because it isn't for everybody. This episode, we are doing deep dives on everything that's in this issue, plus some. So is this an entry-level podcast episode? Not so much, but this is the nitty-gritty of the DC Universe. Are you guys into that sort of thing?
100%, I would say, especially for somebody like me. I started my TikTok page being about DC cosmology because I'm a huge Grant Morrison fan, and I think that Grant Morrison really established that bigger, weird meta world of DC in a cool way, and helped like connect a bunch of just continuity tissue between a lot of the different eras of Silver Age and all this other stuff. So from there on, I just kind of went on a big deep dive, looking at everything, trying to figure out what fits and connects. So I've always been a big fan of the DC continuity. I think it honestly gets a little bit of a bad rap for how bad its continuity is, even though it is pretty bad. But I do think there is connective tissue there if you go and read between the lines and just the smaller little things. And you'll see there's actually a lot more connective tissue there than people would assume.
I mean, there's a lot of connective tissue, but whether the company pushes that, DC as a company pushes one way or another, this at least is now essentially the series Bible, right? Like, they do that for TV shows where, hopefully you don't go like too far off and jump the shark, where like, this is what the show's about, these are the rules about the characters and whatnot, and like, kind of cool to see this pop up. Earlier today, I was talking to my girlfriend, and I was trying to tell her, like, what this podcast would be about. She doesn't know, like, that stuff, right? Like, the nitty-gritty of DC Comics makes no sense. I was trying to explain it. I was like, look, Marvel has a sliding timeline, everything has happened within, like, 15 years, but now, and, like, you just subtract 15 years again, I guess. But DC Universe, like, always reboots. None of that makes sense to anybody. But I mean, I'm glad that Jack, you're on this. Drew, I mean, are you really into the nitty gritty?
So this is the thing. You and I have talked about this on Comic Talk before,
Uh-huh.
in that like I don't really care about continuity. For me, it's like if the continuity serves the story, then use it. But if you need to bend things a little bit to make your story work, that for me it's like character comes first. That said, I really um like fictional histories quite a bit. So this is this is appealing to me less so on a oh I need to know how it all fits together sort of way, and more on a I just really want to like know the details of this new version of the universe, like now that there's been so much published since like the original Marv Wolfman, George Perez history of the DC universe,
Yeah.
and they haven't really revisited it outside of, they did the new history of the DC universe. John Ridley and Giuseppe Camuncoli did that, but that was only focusing on specific
The
characters.
other history, right? The other history?
Yeah, yeah. Is that what I said? Did I say it wrong?
I don't know. I heard the new history again, but
It's probably what I said, which is what's in my hand right now.
yeah.
Yeah, the other history of the DC universe, which I loved, but is very much in this style. They've also done the Wonder Woman like Amazon Historia. Is that what it was
Oh,
called?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Wonder
Yes.
Woman Historia of the Amazons. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
and again in the same style as this, but only addressing like this stuff over here and not looking at the wider, DCU.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like that's what's appealing to me is to see like now we've got all this new stuff. How does it fit into the fictional history? How do we create a fictional history out of all of this? And I'm not a continuity guy except when it serves the story.
Yeah.
This I'm just treating as kind of a hey, this is how it all this is what happened.
Yeah.
I think I fully agree with that. I think that's kind of my mindset about it because I don't love DC history because I'm like, I need this all to fit together story wise. I just love it because I think when there's that connective tissue between everything, that's just in general really cool. So I look at that isolated from my enjoyment of the individual story. So I
Yeah.
think I honestly agree. I can read these stories, and if there's continuity issues, like as long as they're not overbearing on the story in any kind of way, I don't really care. But I
Yeah.
just like looking at that DC history and going, oh, that's really cool. All of these events happen at the same time. This influenced this. Like all those little butterfly effects of how it goes down the timeline of DC is really fascinating to me.
Yeah. And like you mentioned Grant Morrison earlier, and obviously like Grant Morrison's Batman is very, very, I mean, a lot of Grant Morrison superhero stuff is built on continuity and making it all fit together. But especially Batman is like, it's so rooted in this history and this, and it works so well for that story. Same thing for like Jeff Johns' entire Green Lantern run
Oh,
is
yeah.
built on the spine of all of these different things happened. But then I see a lot of complaints from people who are just like, well, this is coming out of continuity, or like we don't know when this takes place. And I'm just like, why do you need to know when it takes place?
Yeah.
Like
Like if it's not hurting the overall story, those vague points of like, where in the timeline does this take place? I don't need to know.
yeah,
You know what I mean? As long as it's not ruining anything on the timeline, I don't need to know. That vagueness, I'm fine with.
yeah,
I'm gonna push back and I'm gonna say this. Here's the thing. So I think that continuity does matter because that's kind of how you extrapolate what you can build from it. And so a lot of readers are just kind of, and this is for movies and TV, right? But like a lot of viewers, a lot of readers are just there for the ride. And if you're just there for the ride, it doesn't matter what the ride is, right? But the cohesive nature, if you're not only there for the ride, but you're also like in it for like the fan fiction and the unofficial stuff, right? Like your theories and whatever. It's hard to extrapolate theories if the foundation isn't like set up. And then in my head, I'm like, okay, like who, like as a fan, who would I want to be on the Teen Titans, right? And I'm extrapolating a team. Part of my thought process is, what are the unofficial ages of these characters? Can I roughly kind of make things work? And if I'm thinking about storylines in my head, like their ages do come into play, right? And I'm not a writer for DC Comics, but somebody here has been. I think it's just easier to write things having a series Bible. And maybe it's not about the nitty gritty. You don't need stuff about Perpetua when you're writing Gotham City. But like,
right.
What were you gonna say?
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, I say all that, but then like really both of the DC work that I've done, like one was a video game that was like separate from the comic continuity, but like Justice League Cosmic Chaos, the theme of it was the history of the Justice League. So like I say all that and then I'm like, well, yeah, but like the longer story that I did was very much rooted in the history of these characters and the universe in which they exist. And then the Secret Six story that I did was very clearly like it was kind of an addendum to Gail Simone's Secret Six.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. Maybe I'm being hypocritical because I drew so heavily from those because in the end, I do like that stuff, but I'm not a stickler about it, I guess. And so maybe what this book is intended to do is to take your philosophy and like somebody like a philosophy like mine and what Jack and I were saying and find a place in the middle.
Yeah.
And bring us closer together.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that balance is what enhances the stories for me, because even though on a level, I don't need all of these pieces of continuity to come together perfect for the story to, be fantastic for me. Like, it won't take anything away from me, but having that together and having that history and knowing those aspects of the character, whatever it may be, do enhance the stories. And I think stuff like this, the new history of DC, it does make you want to go back to certain things. Like, I always think about the first time when I read like Emerald Twilight. The reason that was enhanced for me as I went through that and like Jeff Johns Green Lantern stuff was that I was keeping track of that continuity. And I was thinking, oh, this is like Cyborg Superman from Death of Superman and Reign of Superman. Oh, now he's in the mix with all this Green Lantern stuff. This all makes sense. And you start to see the buildup of all these events. And like you said, I think that paves way for the people who like the fan theories or just like to be on that ride of everything coming together. And I think that even though I don't have any necessary like positives taken away if all that continuity is not there, it does bring an enhancement to the story that I just think is so valuable. And I think that I can understand for sure.
I think we want, like, as fans, most fans want an immersive universe, like, that they can throw themselves into. I think there are comics out there that do 6 issues of like their own contained story. Let's just say an Image comic or Dynamite or Boom Studios or whatever, and they have their story from start to finish, one issue to 6 issues, whatever, and then that's it, and that is the story, and that's the story the writer wanted to tell, and that's it, and that's great. But I think that like DC and Marvel kind of hinges on like this immersive nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I think that especially like, I mean, even looking back to the stories that I love that are so strong in continuity, like when I look at Grant Morrison's Batman, that's the kind of thing where I think if you started off with it and you were confused, you could go back and try to get clarity of what all this history is. And
that is where I started. The first issues of Batman that I ever read were in the smack dab in the middle of the Batman RIP arc. And
wow,
I was very much lost. And so, like, luckily the internet exists and I could like, figure out where I was. I loved starting with Batman there because it gave me a lot of like, it's a celebration of the history of Batman. But it also like, I don't know that I would suggest other people do that.
Which one is this?
This is Grant Morrison's Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, chiming in for Grant Morrison's thing, I think that Grant Morrison does a great job with continuity, but almost too good of a job in the way that Grant wants to make the meta idea become physical continuity. Like
I fully agree with you. It's weird though for me, that's what I think I love most because I think in concept that can fail. I think the way that they do it is such a home run, at
yeah,
least for me. Final Crisis is by far my favorite book, period, ever. That is my favorite. Like, I love that more than anything in the world. And I get it. It's messy, it's confusing. I would not blame somebody if they like hated it. I would not blame you. But for me, that I read that going in almost knowing nothing about these outside characters. I was unbelievably confused. But going through and rereading and seeing all these little pieces just made me so excited to go and read these past stories that connect to it all and got me so excited. So I do think that that at least does connect to that idea of like, you know, even if you're not like the story's not ruined by not having all these continuity pieces, getting them and the build up to it all and knowing who these characters are just enhances it on such a different level.
yeah. I want to shout out. We got BP, probably not British Petroleum, but probably a different BP, in the comments on our YouTube asking. Well, I asked everybody, did you guys pick this up? What do you guys think? BP says not yet, wondering if this would be a good jumping off point for someone new to comics, or if this is going to go over my head. Now, here's the thing. I replied, it depends on what kind of reader you are. Do you do Wikipedia deep dives for the things that you read, for the things that you watch? Me personally, after I watch a movie, I go on Reddit. I already have my opinions and whatever,
Me too.
but I want to see like what other people are thinking. And also I want to see what I missed. Did I miss any references, right? When I read a comic, I do some, going down Reddit, whatever. If I don't know who Dr. Occult is, who seems to be a character that Mark Waid is pushing as of Justice League Unlimited, but then also as of this issue of New History of the DC Universe, issue number 1, like maybe I do a deep dive of Dr. Occult. But some people don't. Some people don't want that, right? And it just depends on what kind of reader you are. My little backstory is when I was younger, I couldn't afford single issues. They were at the grocery store when I was like really young, and then they phased out. But the point being is I couldn't afford all the different comics that I wanted. So instead, what I did was I bought Wizard magazine once a month, and that kept me up to date with like, oh, Winter Soldier is coming in. He's actually Bucky. Like that was a big news for that time. That was printed magazines. I got that, and then I still have them. DK Encyclopedias did a run of like different character encyclopedias in big like hardcover format for kids to like look at, and there was like pictures of the things, and they were age appropriate, and like I had one of Batman, one of Superman, one of the Justice League, one of Spider-Man, one of X-Men, and like whatever. So the point being is like I got a pretty good cursory knowledge of this universe that as a kid I wasn't reading week to week, month to month. But that's just the type of person I was. And then when I could look up stuff online, I looked it up online.
Yeah, and I think especially for this, it's an interesting one where, like you said, it is like, are you the kind of person that just loves absorbing these huge chunks of information? Because I know friends that are like that. I have friends that haven't really dived into a lot of individual DC characters alone, but are obsessed with just like the world building aspect and just learning about the world. You might be somebody that comes into it like that, but if you're looking for like a realm to start off in where you're like, all right, I want to be introduced to everything, it's like, maybe give it a shot, see how you like it, but don't blame yourself if you're like, this is an overload of info. Let me try something else.
Yeah. And right now, if you guys are watching us live, again, like, comment, subscribe, follow, show us you're out there, write a review. If you're listening to the podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, write a review or something. It's nice to know when people are out there. If you are watching us live, you can see all the artwork, the cover work that went into just this issue alone. And then I also have, and this is because these were free preview pages. These are technically allowed per copyright. Just the first couple pages of this book, they were preview pages that are for public consumption. So you can kind of see, if you're watching us live on youtube.com/The Keeg Show, you can see these like pages and kind of how this issue is set up. Because BP asks whether it's more like an encyclopedia or whether it's a narrative. And it's not really a narrative, though it is narrated by Barry Allen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a weird kind of like, I wouldn't say hybrid of those two things, but it reads like it's trying to be a narrative, but it's kind of like an encyclopedia.
Yeah. Mark Waid did, I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys, Mark Waid, years back, and this is something that I picked up from the library. Mark Waid wrote a book called The Life Story of the Flash. This was back when Barry Allen was dead, and it was an in continuity book. So it was Life Story of the Flash written by Iris West Allen. And when you look into it, then you're like, oh, it's written by Mark Waid. It's on the inside, right? And it was the life story of Barry Allen to when he dies and like some future stuff. Because in continuity, it was a book that Iris West Allen wrote when she's in the future after Barry's death. And I loved it. It's very similar to this, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that it's, especially with this book, I'll say, I think that it's very interesting the way that they're going about this, because obviously it's 4 issues. And I wouldn't say shocked, but more like didn't see it coming of how much information would be packed into each issue.
Yeah.
And I do like it, but it does make me think, man, I wish this was like 6. You know, I wish this was maybe like 6 issues. And I do appreciate what they're doing, but it's like, man.
It is. So you earlier asked the question, or somebody asked the question, would this be something for a new reader? I think this would be kind of the perfect thing for a new reader, because it isn't going to go into deep, like, are you going to get the details of who
Eclipso? We both said Eclipso at the same time. Yeah.
Are you going to get the details of Eclipso? No, not really. You're just going to get the broad strokes. Then in the back, what I like about it, in the back, it kind of gives you the timeline, but it's broken down into how you can read this stuff. So, like, if you do want to know the details of Eclipso, they tell you these are the issues to read, this is the year it came out, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I think that's a really good point, Drew, because it is done in such a broad way where, for me, as somebody who loves DC history, of course, I'm thinking through the lens of, I wish this was maybe 6 issues so we could stretch it out more. But if you're looking at a general overview for somebody to step in and just, like I said, if you're somebody who wants to absorb all this info, you don't care if it's all these large text blocks, you just want to take it all in, I think this is perfect. Because like you said, if you want to go deep into it and start learning about all of this, everything towards the back of the issue gives you all the starting points for this stuff. So if you're someone that's like, oh, all this stuff with the Manhunters and the Lantern history is really interesting, I want to go into this, well, now you have a starting point. And even on top of that, I would argue that can help bring you to like little reading orders that people might put online to be like, hey, you should also check out this issue of this. This might help. And that can just bring you into the world that you specifically are interested in.
Yeah. I think like the funny thing about this book is the first half is this perfectly like illustrated narrative by Barry Allen, and Barry Allen technically doesn't touch on everything, right? But he's talking through it, and it's Jerry Ordway and Todd Knock doing the art. Mark Waid is writing. Again, I have no doubt Mark Waid did most of this, but I think he's also supported by Dave Wielgos. So if I'm saying that correctly. So there's a lot of research that went into this. I don't think this is off of Mark Waid's dome, but like I'm sure most of it is, right?
Yeah.
And then okayed by DC editorial for this. But the last part is the way I saw it was last part is information that they didn't want to fit into the actual like artwork and everything. Like they didn't want to write that. They were just like, here is an index of like more stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's been a good job overall from DC writers of trying to get like a decent like chunk of continuity, right? Like I think Scott Snyder tried to keep that pretty established with his 2018 like Justice League run. And I think he did a pretty good job staying consistent with things like that, like the cosmology of like the hands and like the universe being created, all the multiverse stuff, adding Perpetua. And I think he did that in a safe way that made sense and followed what Morrison was doing. And then from there, after that, you had Joshua Williamson with Dark Crisis, because his entire Justice League Incarnate, the multiversal Justice League team, that entire story is just basically going over who all the big bads are throughout DC and all the big cosmic guys. And then he's got one of those issues that just basically kind of does what this does, but just on a more general cosmic level, and explains, yep, here's the Anti-Monitor, here's what all that is, here's what the Great Evil Beast is, which is this whole other thing. And it's like explaining the whole timeline to you. And so then I think just Williamson and Snyder did a good job bridging things. So it's not like you have to go through thousands of different texts where it's all these different contradicting things. It's like, hey, we may have retconned like a tiny thing here or two, but this is pretty streamlined how things go. So I think jumping from Williamson, Snyder to Wade, I think he's followed this streamlined continuity pretty well.
Yeah. Drew, reading this issue, like, do you think there was something they could have done better?
Better? I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when it comes down to it, I think it serves the purpose that it is attempting, which is just, again, broad strokes. This is how the DC universe was created, and this is what played into it. So we have everything from the dawn of the universe to really Superman being sent to Earth. We get that all of the broad strokes of that. There are things that I was hoping to see more of, but I understand why we didn't get it.
Well, because I also think some people are like, I saw some complaints just talking about how like you can cursory, like they seem like cursory touch on things, but then not go into depth. And it's like, I think that's the whole point, is like just establishing that, like, I mean, there's a couple of big things that we'll go over, but like establishing X, Y, and Z, but leaving it to future stories, future writers, future artists to like go in depth about. Like, we don't need to know all about Icon, because I think that is one of the biggest things in this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, Icon. After they did the new milestone, it was kind of up in the air. Is this the same universe?
It wasn't. The new milestone specifically wasn't, because they had like a Clark Kent baby come to Earth and automatically be killed. Like, the new milestone universe was its own, almost like ultimate milestone in a way.
And so like seeing Icon in this and says like, yes, he is a part of this. I don't need the detail of that because I can go read Icon stories.
Or wait for the upcoming Icon Year 1. If that already hasn't happened, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think these points are really important too, because I've seen a lot of just general conversation around this book being like, oh, I wish there was more focus on like the Justice Society and that whole era, or the insert this little thing. And it's like, sure, to a degree, but I think you can't lose track of the fact that you want this to not necessarily just only be an overview of the history, but a focus on the history, right? Like, as important as it is to focus on these characters, like, as cool as it would be if this whole thing was like looking through Vandal Savage's eyes of the entire DC history, that'd be cool. But that's not what this is, right? It is basically an encyclopedia. And ultimately, you want to keep to that so that we can get through all this history. As cool as it would be to focus a little bit on the Justice Society and keep that going for a few pages, there is a lot of history to go over here, and I'm already somebody who wishes that it was stretched out a little bit more. So I think just keep on the track and just keep going here, because I think I agree with Drew. I think it's as good as it can be. As much as I prefer, maybe 6 issues a little bit more drawn out, for what you're trying to do, this is probably the best way you could get over everything without slowing down your pacing.
Yeah, and stepping on other writers' toes, right? Like, if this issue went over all of Eclipso, then like, I don't know whether another writer wants to like be doing an Eclipso story.
Yeah.
Unless it's, again, retconning something from his past or whatever, right? But they do a really interesting kind of thing with everything, because this issue starts from the Big Bang, essentially, the creation of the DC Universe, and then it ends with just Krypton exploding. Like, it doesn't go into let's see what Jor-El's grandfather was born at this date. Like, no, like, it isn't going to Jor-El and Lara. It's like just the explosion.
Really what it's doing, if you know, like in the back before they start listing everything, it says like these are all grouped thematically. So like, you know, you have all your creation stories towards the beginning, and
Yeah.
then you have all, you know, like all that. But really, even then, all it's really doing is serving as the introduction to Superman. Like everything in here is building to, you know, oh, we had this entire like group of characters at home, you know, like, you know, in on Earth, and this is all leading to Superman coming here and maybe being inspired by them, or, you know, like building upon a history that already existed. And if you read it that way, that's exactly what it's doing. It's just building to Superman.
Right.
Yeah. And on a cosmology level too, I love that just because not only obviously Superman's the most important DC character, but the way that Morrison built on that entire like meta idea of Superman was that he is like the entirely important aspect of the universe. Like he is that like figurehead, not even just on like a narrative level, but on like a meta level of what DC is. And so I think ending off on that note and keeping it just so simple works so well because it does this thing, at least for me, where it follows a lot of what Grant Morrison set up in a way that isn't very specific. It's not like touching on all the weird meta stuff that Grant attacked, but he did it in a way I think Wade did that just felt like vague enough where you're not trying to make it this big meta narrative, but you are just establishing all these little things. Like, yeah, this is about Superman. These are all the things that build up to Superman and his importance. So I really like the way that was done.
So the way I view this is think about like an hourglass, right? And I guess for the sake of our thing, let's turn that hourglass sideways, right? You get all the big stuff at the beginning, and it all leads to that crux where that like the middle of the hourglass where that's Superman, right? But like everything leads up to Superman, and then Superman blasts off even more from there, right?
Yeah.
Like a sideways
Yeah.
hourglass. That's the way I'm envisioning it. But like a lot of Superman adaptations, let's just say, the Man of Steel, right? Like it starts off with there's, as far as we know, there's nothing going on with that universe. It's just the same as us, and then Clark lands and sparks off everything. But I think that comic books, and by way of I think James Gunn's Superman that's coming out, things have existed beforehand, things will continue to exist after him, but he focuses everything,
Yeah. And I think it gives it this very interesting, like, I wouldn't say like mythical vibe to it, but it gives it this vibe of like, obviously, Superman is so utterly important. And there's a lot of people who love the idea of Superman being the first hero, right? And I think that if you're not going to go that route, I think doing it like this and looking at all of the history and timeline and cosmology through this big buildup, like you said, of all these events, and then it all funnels into this one thing of boom, he crash lands on Earth. It does it in such a way where I used to be someone who loved the idea of Superman being the first hero. I have very much over the past couple of years changed on that, and I actually really love the way that this history builds up to that big moment of this is the moment that he shows up, that this is his time, this is Superman.
Right. I think if you take any sport and you pick your most iconic player, and I'm talking with my limited knowledge about sports. Like I know enough, but not like crazy. But like Michael Jordan isn't the first basketball player. Like
Yeah.
if you're a huge Jordan fan, it's like the Bulls aren't the first team to ever exist. Like basketball can exist before Jordan, but then you can
Yeah.
explain that basketball was forever changed by Jordan.
Yeah. You look at like a Tom Brady, it's like, sure, the Patriots, they're a team, but when it gets to the point in the timeline of when Tom Brady shows up, that's the big deal. This is this guy.
Yeah. BP is asking in the comments, has Marvel done anything similar to this? Now here's just the quick way that I like to describe it. Marvel, even when they did a reboot after Secret Wars, it wasn't a true reboot, right? It merged Miles and a couple other characters in. But the point being is, Marvel has never done a proper reboot. Not for the 616 universe. They get around it by doing what's called a sliding timeline, which essentially states that like all the stories that we've read in Marvel exist unless they're retconned. But the specifics of it, like meeting the president and the president's Richard Nixon, doesn't exist. Like that part gets changed to whoever the president was X amount of years ago that story took place. So if you look at Marvel, it's really about what's happening now and what's happening X amount of time ago. But that X is never defined as like how long. So personally, I think like Peter Parker, you know, he started at 16. I'd like to think that like the Marvel universe is around 20 years old. That's me personally. Some people are like, no, Peter Parker's still early 20s. And I'm like, no, the whole Marvel universe did not take place in like 5 to 7 years. Captain America being unfrozen from ice, the Fantastic Four starting, Peter Parker, those are like things we can chart. But Marvel doesn't do a full reboot, so technically everything is canon. So Marvel does do encyclopedias like this, but like it's generally thought like everything that has happened has happened. DC started off as a company as its like own thing, and then it bought out a lot of other companies and merged, and DC's constantly merging and then like sloughing off other stuff that they don't want anymore, and then rebooting and whatever. So is that a fair summation for you guys? Do you guys agree with that?
I think so. I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Drew?
I mean, I have, my thoughts have always been that, you know, people always say like, oh, like superheroes and comics, like they're the new mythology. Well, let's treat them like mythology. Nobody asks, when did Loki and Hercules and all of these characters, like, when did they exist at the same time? Or like when in the timeline did they do this stuff? How long ago? No, man, they're just stories. Like nobody asks that about Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. Nobody like ever wonders, well, how did when in the timeline did the Odyssey happen?
Yeah. Like, and I think I always go through every DC story, especially in my head, is like, how can this be enhanced for me? Like, is the all this vague continuity, is that ruining it for me? And most of the time it isn't. It just truly isn't. But for me, it's always about like, how can it get enhanced? So I fully agree. Like, it's the thing for me where it's like, if there's these vague aspects of the DC mythology, I'm like okay with that, right? In fact, I would argue maybe from that there could be some interesting stories told because of that vague history or whatever it may be, right? Like allow them to exist as this myth, right? Especially like in the storyline when it comes to like how old like Batman and them are. It's like it's messy, but I'm okay with that being messy. I don't have to think about it that hard. But I also don't blame people for wanting that structure, for wanting that structure within their story, because I do think that there is an enhancement, like I said, to the story from that. For me, it's just not a negative if I don't have that. I can treat it as, like you said, Drew, the story and the characters coming first.
For me, I like a timeline, even with mythology. I don't need to know exact years, but like something I was talking to about, because I used to be a Greek mythology fan, like a huge one, and Jason and the Argonauts are a lot of Greek heroes. It was the Avengers of Greek mythology, right? Like, and they were sailing and then going on missions. Hercules was an Argonaut. I would love to know, and this is something I don't know off the top of my head, and you know, at what point did Hercules join the Argonauts? Was it after his labors? Was it in between? Was he a little bit more green? Was he a young Hercules that hadn't, you know, met and killed his wife? Like, where is this? It would be nice, and I think though we do view Greek mythology as a product of its time. There's the historical context of it. So DC and, you know, comics in general, I'm okay with adaptations changing things. I'm okay with all this stuff. Like, I'm not saying I just want it somewhat set. Like, let me know, and then we can kind of extrapolate from this.
Yeah.
I think there are many people who believe that you cannot enjoy it without like a very rigid set of like guidelines and rules and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you know, like to to those people, like it's okay to want to know like when did things happen? Where in relation to this event did this other event happen? You know,
Right.
like that's fine to be curious about. And maybe, you know, there's like that can inspire a really good story.
Yeah.
And if it inspires good stories, I'm all for it. If a person is finding that they cannot enjoy something because it is not like very narrowly defined for them, I think that they just need to be looking at it differently. That's all
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
I have a rule with that, especially when it comes to movies, and especially some DC movies where it's all I mix in with like the suspension of disbelief, where it's like, all right, all the cinema sins era of like critiquing movies, where it's like, why did insert this little thing? Why did this guy's not hair move back in the wind? Or how come canonically, technically, this guy did this, but that? It's like I can like pretend I don't care about that. I just don't. You know what I mean? Like I can use my disbelief and go, whatever, that's fine. And I kind of apply that a lot of the times when I'm reading these comics and there is these big gaps in history where I'm like, well, I don't get that, or we don't have clarity to that. It's like I can gauge in my head and go, okay, this isn't ruining the story for me, so I don't really care. And there will be moments sometimes where it's something integral and maybe it affects the storyline for me, but those moments happen very rare. I can ultimately look at that and be like, that's fine. I'm still invested in the story. This isn't ruining the story for me. I don't need that structure. It could help, but it's not taking away anything for me.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Like Jurassic Park: The Lost World, the second Jurassic Park movie. There's the scene where the RV goes off the ledge and it's hanging there, and there is a error in the movie where Jeff Goldblum yells out Vince to Vince Vaughn instead of Vince Vaughn's character Eddie. No, Eddie's the other guy. I forget his character's name, but the point being is like he yells out Vince. Does that factor in? Am I making mental gymnastics on the continuity of Jurassic Park? Why he would yell Vince? Do I have to be like, well, no, Dr. Ian Malcolm must had a friend like that reminded him that his friend was named like Vince, Cortispodi, and like it's reminding him of that. No, I don't care. It was an error. I know that. Moving forward, like I don't care, you know.
Yeah.
But when it comes to DC Comics, and again, I can enjoy individual stories as individual stories. There are stories where Superman or Lex Luthor meets Clark Kent for the first time in Metropolis as adults. And then there's stories where Lex Luthor and Clark lived in Smallville together. And I can enjoy those two stories separate. But when I have to say, if somebody's like, oh, tell me about Superman in like the timeline, I don't want to have to be like, well, in one universe they did, in one universe they didn't. I want to be able to say Clark and Lex grew up in Smallville together. They were friends until he thought he was betrayed, lost his hair, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's nice to be able to just say that.
Yeah, I have this. I kind of separate my enjoyment, even though I hold on a little bit more valuable. Like, I can enjoy those individual stories and say, that's an error, whatever. But also, there is that value of the enjoyment of a story that is built up through a history of like things that matter in our set, right? Like, I always use this example just because whether or not you love the universe, it's a perfect example of like a build up to a big story. But like the MCU, right? There's these set moments, these set events, like people know what like the blip is and all these other little things. These are set events, moments when these characters were introduced, and those build up to something and they create a new value to a story. You can love these things as individual stories, but also there is so much value to a story that is built up through events and moments of these characters. Like it will matter if Clark and Lex grew up together in Smallville, or it was different, right? Like that, it makes a difference. And whatever the story you're building up to could be incredibly enhanced by that decision. So, as much as I can read them individually, I do think that that history builds to something that is so exciting that I totally understand why I can get to be a gripe for people if it is, incorrect.
Right. I mean, Drew, we how you feeling?
I mean, my feeling is superheroes are undoubtedly part soap opera.
Yeah.
There is no way in hell that I am going to sit down, like, if let's say I wanted to start watching to go back to your hourglass motif.
Hmm.
Let's say I wanted to start watching The Days of Our Lives, right? And I want to start watching it right now in 2025,
Yeah.
provided that that show is still running. I think that it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that show has been on since like the 60s, and it's been the same continuity.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm watching all of those episodes.
No.
There's no way. There's no way. And so like it can be a really rewarding experience for somebody who may be old enough now to have been able to watch it since it debuted and see how everything has, from the past has informed now. But when it comes down to it, I think that all media, including superheroes, um, needs to be about the times that we're living in.
Hmm.
They need to be informed by those times. And if they're going to be informed by history, fine, but if something that started in 1938 needs to be built up to like built upon and built upon and built upon in order for something in 2025 to hit just right, I think that's bad storytelling.
Right.
I think that's fair. And I think that's why I always look at it through the lens of like, is this history enhancing the story for me? Or is it like the lack of it ruining it? And for me, I don't get to a place of it ever ruining it. It always can add more to what I already enjoy, right? But it's never in a place where I'm like, this is, I don't know this history from 1938
Yeah.
for Superman. It's ruining the story for me. That doesn't
So
happen.
you have to find the balance because if I'm even something that hasn't been running for 80 years, right? The MCU. Uh, if I'm watching a movie and my understanding of the emotional stakes has to come from a television show that ran even a year before, I mean that movie might not work for me.
And it's also failing as a movie, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And so like you have to find the balance. How do you reward the people who followed that storyline, but also keep the stakes for somebody who only is watching this one thing? It's the same thing. It's the same thing for comics. How do you create the emotional stakes? How do you make the plot points and the character moments hard hitting and relevant to just that self-contained story, while also rewarding the experience for the people who have been there for the long haul?
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially for these expanded universes like DC, when you're going about it story by story, you might have a story where you're like, hey, this is technically a sequel. Like, I'm kind of continuing this Batman storyline and all these little pieces, they connect. But also, how can you make this something that's like a new reader could come and enjoy it? Like, that's why I like the new 52 Batman, because you can come in. I don't think you need to know all this history. You can know who Robin is. That's really about it. I don't think you have to have all this extended info on Damian. You'll figure things out as you go along, right? But the Court of Owls, that's a new little thing for you, right? You don't need to know all this extensive info going forward post Court of Owls to understand other stories, right? But there's still enough there that if you decide to go down the road of reading more, I don't know, Court of
Mhm.
Owl stories in this case, now you're rewarded. You're like, that's awesome. I was following the storyline. But it never should feel like a necessity that you have to know all this. It should consistently, in my opinion, feel like a choice for you to enhance the story for yourself by going to go read this history. It
Yeah.
shouldn't feel like you're losing something.
Right, right. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think to bring it back to this book,
Yeah.
I think the purpose that this is serving is to just kind of give you the highlights. And let's say you're reading, let's say 5 years from now, you're sitting down, you're a person who's never really read comics before, but you're like, I think a guy who can run really fast is really cool. So you're reading The Flash, right? And there is a character who shows up and they allude to a history together. And you're like, oh, I know about that because it was talked, like I recognized this guy because it was talked about in the New History of the DC Universe, which is another book I own.
Yeah.
You know, it's it gives you kind of just somewhere to start so that you can at least have the smallest bit of recognition and like, okay, maybe this is something that I can know about. And then you go back and find the story, which is why I really like that they put the reading, like the actual issues in the back.
Yeah, that by far is the highlight for me for the story is that they allowed you to have that choice to dive deeper into these things. Because I think if it was just generally an overview of everything, that would ultimately do its goal. But I would be asking the questions of like, oh, they didn't need to go deeper on things, but I wish there was some kind of outlet for you to make that choice to go read more if you wanted to. Sure, you can go look things up and be like, hey, what about this? But I like that they added that little section that would be like, here's what it all looks like. If you want to read more, here's where you can go. And now you have
Yeah,
that choice.
they also included stuff that they didn't get to in the main part of the book.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking to myself, why didn't they include Gem World in here, you know? And then it's in the back, right? Like it tells you about Gem World. That's one of the things that, you know, I would have liked for them to have included. But since they grouped them thematically, maybe there just wasn't a place where it could fit or too many places for it to fit. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a smart choice to me to be able to keep all that info. But if you are like so many blocks of text to explain all of this, I get it if maybe you're putting this all together and you're like, I'm not trying to overcrowd the page here. People will have the info. Let's put it towards the back here and give specifics of where they can check this out. That way,
Yeah.
you're still getting the information. You can look over this thing almost like a study guide.
It what I think too. I'm gonna go on like a tiny bit of a tangent here, and then I'm gonna bring it back so that it
Okay, I'm
makes
trusting you.
one of my least favorite bits of media that is on the internet is dudes summarizing comic book stories. Um,
Yes, 100%.
and it's like I totally understand why somebody who is interested in comics would want to watch that.
Hmm.
And I totally understand why there's an audience for it. I get it. And I'm not even really knocking the people who do it. I don't want to come off like I'm like, you shouldn't be doing this, you know. But what it comes down to is let's say that we have two people who are doing the same thing. They're both summarizing the same story. And one of them is a really strong reader in the sense that like his comprehension skills are very high. He can understand like the metaphors and
The
the
contacts and everything.
yeah, like
Yeah.
all of that really well. And the other one is not. Um, they both read the same story. They're both going to get different things out of it, but when they report it to their audience, one of them is going, like each of them are going to be missing out on things that the other isn't. And it's totally down to like their biases of like what they felt was important for the person to read for the person to know.
Right.
So what I like about this, tying it back here, is that the first part of that is kind of those guys. It's those guys just kind of being like, all right, this is what happened. But then in the back, it is stressing the importance of reading it for yourself because then you are not beholden to just what somebody else is telling you. You can go and like get into the weeds, get into the details, and find the things that are important to you in that. One of my favorite books is Watchmen, and I make like tons of videos about the literary qualities of Watchmen and why like Watchmen is so studied and important. But at the end of the day, you're still getting it through my lens of seeing it. And when I teach Watchmen in my classroom, students pick up on stuff because they have a different experience than I do. They pick up on stuff that I didn't and they point it out. And that's always really exciting for me because for one, I get to learn something new about a book that I love, but I also get to see somebody really applying their own understanding of the reading instead of just taking my word for it. Uh, um, all that is to say, they are giving the readers the ability to do that. to go and like experience these stories for themselves. So it is not being treated as an alternative to reading those stories. It's almost being treated as a jump, like a map of where to find those stories,
Yeah.
while also serving the primary purpose of making sense of this amorphous blob that is the DC universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point too, because like you should be bringing in people who want to read these stories or be informed through the lens of here's something you might be interested in. Do you want to dive deep into this? Are you seeing what this Green Lantern stuff is and you're really interested? You should go into that. It shouldn't just be like Blackest Night fully explained 6 hour video and I just go over the whole thing,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, it does not matter. I'm going to bring it back to literature. I can tell you the story of Hamlet, right? I can just tell you that story. I can be like, oh, it's about a guy who's, his uncle killed his dad, and like,
You just stole that from Lion King.
yeah, I can tell you that story. But if you do not get, like, if you don't experience for yourself Shakespeare's wordplay, if you don't experience for yourself, uh, you know, Dan Mora's ability to tell a story through a series of panels for yourself, if you don't have the if you just don't like take the time to experience to appreciate pencil strokes
Yeah.
on a page or coloring, you know, that somebody like went took the time to put down, or even like bring it back to Watchmen, like the ability to if you don't allow yourself to see the way that the page is laid out and the way that Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore were using that as a storytelling device, you're missing 90% of Hamlet, you're missing 90% of any number of thousands of Dan Mora books that he's currently drawing right now because somehow he's a machine. Like you're missing so much of what makes comics good. You can be a super, I'm not saying you're not a superhero fan, you're not a comic book fan if you're just hearing these stories secondhand, because I don't know your story.
Yeah.
You may not have the ability to actually do this, but you have to reconcile that you are missing out on something if you are not like really, really appreciating what makes these books so special.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why like on my page, people ask me all the time, like, "Hey, can you make a video, going over like?" As I talk about Final Crisis all the time. It's like I
Yeah.
said, by far my favorite book. I love explaining all the intricacies of it, and people will ask me, be like, "Hey, can you make a video going over all the little pieces?" And I'm like, no, like I'll talk about aspects of it and just like how I feel, but I ultimately want people to go in there themselves because I think sometimes, especially when it comes to just looking at if you wanted to get into DC history and the timeline of everything, and you're wondering, where do I start? What do I get into? What do I like? All this stuff. You should look through it through the lens of your perspective and what you're consuming. Some people almost look at like reading and especially comic books as like, oh, I need to get over that hump of having to read it. Let me watch this video, right? Like this video will help me get the gist of it. And it's like, sure, that could be helpful. But this is a comic book, right? And I think the best way you'll get the most out of this is not hearing someone else's explanation of it, but going through it yourself and finding your own, ideas and thoughts about it. And then maybe from there, go and listen to somebody's explanation. Then from there, go listen to what somebody else has to say about it, right? Especially if we're looking at like this book and the way that it perfectly just goes over things. This is what this is. This is Eclipso, this timeline. If you want to jump into it, go for it. But they're not sitting there going, all right, here's an in-depth analysis of people's already created comic books about what happened there. It's not retreading. It's going, here's this little area. Feel free to hop into it and read and come up with your own thoughts yourself if you like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think the last thing I'll say because I about this because I know we probably want to get back to
We
the
got to
book
get back in the book.
Yeah.
but the very last, like, my favorite kind of like comic videos are more so like dependent upon you having read the story already.
Yeah.
And because like somebody when somebody's really like analyzing it, they're not going to really be explaining, the broad strokes. They're going to get into
Yeah.
and tell you why this thing is important, and you got to know the rest of the context for it. And that's where I think like comic book criticism and comic book analysis really shines.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, so here's the thing. I don't want to sound hypocritical by like all of us are content creators and then we're also doing a podcast, but none of this is meant to be a substitution. When we do comic talk every Thursday, where we talk about the comics of the week, like we have spoilers and everything, but the goal is not to have it be a substitution of like instead of reading. Like we like on this show, especially, I am pushing going to comicshoplocator.com, find a comic shop near you, do that. If you can't do that, that's okay. Go to your public library, find comics there, right? Follow comic content creators that are positive, that are pushing the community of comics, and that's kind of what we're doing here, right?
Hey, you know what? I'll say it because I know you don't want to. Just download stuff for free. I don't care. Just do it. Like,
Do
Like if you have to go so out of your way, just do it. Like
do what you
like,
need to do to promote the community of comics.
there,
If you're
there
doing
was
it to hoard, if you're doing it to, let's just say, be king geek, if you are finding these loopholes to be king geek, don't do it, because I think that the goal of being king geek is flawed in and of itself, right? But I love to share comic content. I love to share the love of it. So if we can all be in this together, whatever is getting you to read is getting you to read. I would like to support the comic book community, so I do push comicshoplocator.com. You find a comic shop near you. There are also online apps, Comixology, DC Universe Infinite, and Marvel Unlimited, right? Those are ways that you do that. Also, buy trades. InStockTrades.com, CheapGraphicNovels.com. Those are two good sites. There's a lot of different ways to do this. But what I want to do before we go into this is also say that, like, when I was a kid, I watched Wishbone. And Wishbone was a show that had a dog, a Jack Russell Terrier, acting out like scenes from books. And he would do all sorts of books. He did the Odyssey, where he played Odysseus. So it was a dog playing Odysseus with human actors. Like, it was the reverse of like anything Muppet related, right? Like, he's the one non-human in it. And it was an amazing show. The goal of the show is to get kids interested into reading, not to substitute their reading. The goal is,
yeah.
at some point, the kid's going to be old enough to read the Odyssey. And they're doing an age-appropriate Odyssey, sure, but the goal is to get them to read later. Reading Rainbow, all these like shows that we desperately need. So PBS, very pro PBS over here. Getting those kids to read by showing them that the subject matter is interesting. That's kind of like what we're going for.
Yeah.
In general, right? Like,
I man, this is a thing that I struggle with a lot. Like, because I think that like people who are younger than me, um, view consuming media differently. So sometimes I'll be like, I teach a film class and I'll be like, hey, has anybody, you show of hands, who's seen this movie we're about to watch? And a few people, this happens almost every time. A few people raise their hands. And I'll be like, oh, you've seen this? And they'll be like, yeah, and then at some point, they reveal they've never watched it all the way through. They saw a couple clips or a trailer for it. And then that's just seeing it. Or the absolute worst one, they put it on TV while they did something else. And so like they didn't actually like get the details of everything. They just like broad strokes for a lot of people is enough. And I reject that entirely. You can't.
and I You see that with comic books too. I've seen this so many times where I know people who they're like, "Oh, I know this comic," but they know it because they have friends who have extensively talked about it. So by proxy, they're like, "Well, I get what it's about," or "Oh, I know." It's like I'll have friends and I'll be like, "Hey, have you read The Court of Owls?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah." We talk about it, and it's like, "Oh, so you saw people talk about it? You saw like a YouTube video briefly discuss it or the history of Batman. Like, it's like you read it, but you didn't really. And it's like, that's fine, but that shouldn't end up becoming a substitution for actually consuming the content.
And it's not
Yeah.
creating a tier system to make us feel better about
No, yeah.
ourselves, right? For example, why isn't this compared to like first base, second base, third base, home run, right? Like,
Yeah.
sure, we use another thing of life to equate that to, but like, even in sex, like a home run isn't necessarily better than third. Like, it just is what you want to do, right? But same goes with this reading stuff. It's like, if the goal is to get people to read, like, sure, talking about it, watching these videos, it's like one step to like the full understanding. If the goal is a full understanding, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
But let's we're gonna
like you,
but yeah,
the way,
continue.
yeah, no, yeah. Last note on that, I was gonna say, like, I think it's always totally fine, however you end up consuming these things, because I talk about it on my page all the time. I'm like, if you're someone who doesn't read comic books, I don't look at you differently. You enjoy what you want to enjoy. If you love the movies, that's what got you into it. You're not really gonna engage with the comics. That's okay, right? But there's never a problem also with continuing to consume more things. So if you are someone who's like, I really want to get into comics, well, then it's all right if you've only read a few things here or there, you've skimmed through things. Allow yourself to go that extra mile and just sit down and read the whole thing. You know, if you've watched a video that briefly went over the Court of Owls, that's pretty cool. But maybe you'll get even more if you go through and you sit down and you consume the actual thing. It's not a bad thing to not do it, but think about how much more you can also get if you do.
Yeah.
I'm a big Batman fan. I know that I am never going to read every Batman book. Like I am not even interested in it. So the stuff that's in here that is filling in the cracks in my knowledge is perfectly fine with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. BP out there says, isn't the joy in it forming your own relationship with art? Why do we want to cliff notes away the fun part? Yeah. Whatever your passion is leading you towards, right? However that is. That being said, I do think that there are people out there that really want to be king geek.
Yeah.
And I say king geek because it's rare you see a queen geek try to be queen geek, but like king geeks are a dime a dozen. And I think the goal is like, it's not fun. And it's
an impossible goal too. You said it earlier. It's impossible because next week everything you know could be different.
Right. So why are we trying to be better than everybody? Let's just be with each other on this journey together. Some people like different things in their comics and some, than other people. And like, we can kind of bridge that gap and create a community through that. So let's talk about this book. First page, even, I'm going to try to bring up this first page. First of all, shout out to Mark Waid and the DC editorial staff and Todd Knock and Jerry Ordway, for doing these awesome things. But I'm trying to see if I can pause this. Yeah, it starts off first page with Barry Allen at a computer, and it's all his narration. Do you guys think that Barry Allen is the best person to be charting the multiverse? Or, well, he used to chart the multiverse. Now he's charting the timeline. Do you guys think he's the best person to be charting the timeline?
I think there could be better. I love the idea of Mr. Terrific being that guy because I consider him to be the smartest in the universe, right? But I do really like the idea, and I talked about this on Thursday, obviously, but I like the idea of treating Barry post-retirement as a guy that's kind of like, the guy behind the computer, right?
Yeah.
Like the guy that knows all this stuff, that is the historian. And for a guy that really did come into the picture of introducing the alternate Earth things, I love the idea of this being kind of where his character leads now, of being this historian. So I don't know if I'm so fully convinced he's the right guy for it, but I think it's okay to make him the right guy for it.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm all right with it.
For me personally, it's like, I'm a big fan of Wally being the Flash and moving past Barry. So the idea of putting Barry in the chair, but he's doing his own, his own thing. I like the idea also because it keeps, kind of moves Barry out of the spotlight. And that's just kind of what that's me personally. That's my thing. And I also think that like charting the multiverse is not as interesting to me as charting the timeline. Charting the multiverse, you can say that there's a world out there where the Justice League are koalas, and like that doesn't affect me. It just makes for cute art, sure. But like everybody's a koala on Earth K. like fine, you know? But like Barry charting a definitive DC history is cool to me. And also, it leads us to like some loopholes where if you ever want to retcon it, you can retcon it a couple different ways. One of which is Barry just didn't see everything.
Yeah.
He's one person. I got
It's
the
also the
page
kind
up,
of
by the
thing.
way, for anyone watching the live stream. I do have the page up. Just that first page.
Yeah, and it's the thing for me where I am fine with Barry being just the centerpiece of this kind of area, of being the multiverse guy. Because to me, I agree. I think that the timeline stuff is way more interesting than the multiverse thing. But I think if you wanted an avenue to take Barry where he can be his own guy, kind of do his own thing, that's kind of the way I feel about Hal, where it's like Hal's done all the cool stuff. So now he's kind of just this legacy dude who just is cool, right? If you want Barry to be something post retirement, this is where I like that to be. If I were to write like a little mini story about Barry, it'd probably be him doing interesting things across the multiverse and charting important information. If you wanted to build more interesting lore pieces of the multiverse, that's where I'd drop it in a story with him talking about these aspects. And so it's not like for me a thing where I'm like fully convinced that he's the right guy for it. But like I said, I'm okay with them making him the guy for this.
Yeah. Drew.
Yes.
Cool. Barry also is a human, and so it's different than like if there was a time traveling god narrating this, where like we lose that sort of perspective.
Yeah.
So I kind of think Barry, like, because I was thinking like maybe the Time Masters or whatever, like, are charting the timeline. But I think if you're too out of the timeline, you can't chart it like Barry does.
Yeah, I like the point you made earlier about, since this is from a human perspective, especially somebody like Barry, I like the idea that and I like explaining things that are retcons or continuity issues with things in lore. Even if they don't work really well, I like that because you're at least giving it a little bit of an effort for fun. I like that can at least work in a way, whether you are convinced of it or not, that you can ultimately be like, hey, this thing wasn't included or this thing's an error. Well, Barry messed it up. And not even in like a silly, he messed up in a silly way, but like genuinely, this is his perspective of what he's learned. So you can take that as a subjective thing in a way where maybe he missed something or maybe something's a little bit wrong, right? Look at the way that like the Court of Owls is introduced. It's like, why does no one know who they are? Nobody knows who they are. Batman doesn't know who they are because they are that secretive. Like these little things where it's like, here's this little explanation as to why this hasn't been a known thing or why Barry might have missed this thing. I think that's an acceptable answer for me in terms of the little things that might be retconned.
Yeah. Well, you could see it as neglect. Barry Allen just didn't see it. Or you could also see it as, look, Kal-El has a sister, and Barry's been sworn to keep that a secret.
Right.
Whatever. Like, I'm not saying that's a good idea. I'm just saying that, like, you can make that happen.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I do think it's weird that in the first page, he has, like, this, like, museum of artifacts. And
That's what I've been looking at this whole time.
I'm like, should Barry have a museum of artifacts of heroes that they're not even dead? Like these are
the
just
thing is,
what?
my question is, do we know when in the timeline this little framing device takes place? Because to me, it felt like it was like, I know he's like younger, but it still felt like this was like years down the road.
That's a good point. Yeah, I generally assumed it to be in like modern DC time, but that does feel like the kind of thing you could justify as like this is a few years away. This is him recapping everything.
Right. It like, are they replicas? Because like if you look at this thing, and again, this is something that you like, if somebody's talking this story to you, you're not catching it. But like if you have the comic, like you have the comic, but like he has like a star rod in the back. He has like Jingold, which is elongated man's like elixir. He also, I think, has some magic artifacts that I'm like, are they magical?
I guess I like to just generally assume it to be either replicas that like these guys gave him so he could put this together, like something along those lines. It's like I can vaguely just probably say that buddies of his gave them to him, or maybe that star rod was given to him because here's a replica I've got.
Now they're the ones that that lost their juice.
Yeah, there you go. That'll work for me.
But like,
Yeah.
but like Skeets is there.
Yeah, they could be broken down Skeets. What does strike me as weird is he has 2 Legion rings from the Legion of Superheroes in little jars.
Little bottles, yeah.
And it's like, if they're in little jars, is it for their protection? Like, what is...
Yeah, that's interesting to me. I wonder how much of these artifacts are supposed to be like just showing you what these artifacts from DC are versus like could this be a hint towards something or like a maybe
Yeah.
something going on or a smaller story you didn't think about? Like that's kind of where I'm generally assuming it to be.
I'm sure there's a thing that looks like the helm of Dream or whatever that gets taken in like the first thing, but I don't think that is. I think that's Dr. Alchemy's mask.
Yeah, I think it might be.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
they look very similar, but I think it's Dr. Alchemy from the Flash comics.
I assumed it was Alchemy, yeah.
Yeah, it looks too like metal because like the Dream Helm is made of like that the like kind of snouty part is a spinal cord, so like
Yeah,
it's or a spinal column, so like it looks just too metally.
yeah. It looks like actually it's Dr. Alchemy's alter ego, Mr. Element. Again, all of this is super deep dives, but you know,
The hockey mask up at the top, is this Sportsmaster or is this Wild Dog?
I thought it was Wild Dog if I looked at it, but you know.
Yeah.
All right,
also, what's the kettlebell looking thing that's at the top?
The kettle? Oh yeah.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say the upside down pot. Is that the red tornado or the first red tornado? No.
Oh, good point. I know what you're saying, like the pot over the head.
Yeah, Ma. Like what? No, or somebody said it's Four Bush. Oh, it's Four Bush Man. Wait, no, Four Bush Man is from Marvel. That's not it, right?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
There's a character with a pot on his head.
I thought you were talking about Bushmaster. I think it is. That's who I thought you were talking about at first.
No, Four Bush Man is like a comedic hero from Marvel. But
I see.
Where is this pot?
It's under the Star Rod. It's right there next to the Star Rod. So it looks like the mask of Ma Hunkel. Hunkel Red Tornado. I think.
Okay.
I have been trying to figure out what that is this entire time because it looks like ice melting to me.
Oh, I see that. But no, I think it's Ma Hunkel's Red Tornado mask.
That makes sense then. That makes sense.
So, you know. Let's go to the next page, just because I don't like the next page because I hate the Monitor, anti-Monitor stuff. That's just not my cup of tea.
I'm a fan of it. I don't know how much I love the Perpetua add-ons to it.
Yeah.
I think I liked the way that Morrison set it up. I thought that made sense. And I don't think that Scott Snyder like messed that up, but he added a lot that made it just a lot more complicated to explain in a way. And I think ultimately it works for me because of the hands thing. Like to me, as long as you establish that the DC universe gets created, right, and the source has these hands and they construct everything, and there's a whole situation with Perpetua, that's fine by me. Keep it that simple. There's more to it, but just keep it that simple. It was more simple before Perpetua, but like I can live with it.
Are they still... Is the World Forger linked with the Dark Multiverse? Is that what the World Forger is?
Yeah. It's a little muddy, but it's basically that he's connected to the Dark Multiverse, and he's forging the worlds, right? He was also a weird part to add on to everything. Yeah. I will say, of all those new additions to the cosmology, probably one of my more favorite pieces is him. I like that as like a third son of the three of them.
I only like the Dark Multiverse by the sake of they are universes that will decay. That they are not stable universes, so they can't be charted numbers 1 to infinity, but instead are negative numbers because they will eventually die. Like they're you know, those unstable isotopes. Like we can create elements in a lab. They will decay over time. They're so unstable. So I kind of like that. But I do not like Monitor. I also don't like Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's a weird thing for me to say as a DC fan. Infinite Crisis is my favorite Crisis. And that's just me.
I love Infinite Crisis. Crisis on Infinite Earths, I get not loving it. I love it for the big crossover event it is. Beyond that, I can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Like it's fun for the nostalgia and looking back at it and being like, wow, what a big crossover. This is so fun. But I'm not like in love with the story. I'm not in love with most of what's going on. It truly really is, I can say, just a lot of nostalgia for me to be like, wow, what a big crossover. More than I'm like, what a great story.
Yeah. Um, I yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is what it is. I mean, they also bring up the endless, which I think is cool. Like I like,
Yes.
you know, um the endless. Drew, I think is a you a big Sandman fan?
It is unfortunately my favorite book ever.
Yeah. And you're speaking not as the book itself is unfortunate, but the writer. But yes.
Yeah, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
I mean, I have so much Sandman stuff like adorning my home. I have the key to hell above my apartment door, you
Oh.
know.
Nice. Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah, big Sandman guy. And so like, speaking of, I mean, I know that not to be like the downer about it. I was kind of surprised that so much of the Sandman stuff was included in this because of the issues with Neil Gaiman. I know that like maybe from a publishing standpoint, it really shouldn't affect things, but and this was likely in development much earlier
Yeah.
than when that stuff started coming out anyway. But like, you have the three of the endless on this page. You have Lucifer and kind of his history on the following page,
Yeah.
which are all related to Sandman. I think on the first page, I think Barry has Destiny's book in the foreground there under Captain Cold's glasses.
Oh.
I think that's what that is.
It does look like it. Yeah.
I like the inclusion of still keeping the endless, just because I always throw it back to Grant Morrison, just because like I think that is the best way to overall look at like DC in the most complicated way, and I like to scale that down to see how writers can simplify that for everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that the way that he or they put together that cosmology map. Of showing like here's where the endless are outside of the multiverse or outside of the multiverse, same thing with the new gods, that has been very much, I would say, consistently used as like a map or tier list of where everything is in the DC universe in a very good way. Like ever since that point for Final Crisis and Multiversity and showing here's what it looks like, here's where everybody is. I think the way that a lot of writers have gone through the history of DC and explained it, like Williamson and Snyder, has been through the lens of showing the importance of the Endless still being a big part of DC,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that they continue going on that route.
Also, let's be honest. This is also kind of like a flex in a way of DC being like, yeah, we own these characters. These characters are part of this universe, and they're folding in the Vertigo stuff as they're not shy to say like Vertigo stuff is still DC stuff. You know,
Yeah,
it is.
100%.
Depending on what it is, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure, but like the Sandman stuff, the Lucifer stuff. By the way, I'm a big fan of like Lucifer, Morningstar, and like that series and everything. So you know, it's really cool to see all this stuff come into play. If you go to the next, that page with Lucifer falling, I guess
Can I
what's that?
can I say on this we brought up Eclipso earlier. I did not know Eclipso was like a fallen angel.
I,
I
I
did not
think
know that either.
I think
Funny
it was a
enough.
retcon and folding in of something else. So they folded throughout this whole issue. They fold in a couple of things, but I knew that he was a angel of wrath or something like that. I think that was set up, or a demon of wrath or something like that. But I don't know when it was folded in. So I
Like
think they merged him with somebody else.
as that'd be interesting. Okay. As like a writer, many times my first thing is like when I learn something new about a character, my first thought is always, well, what story can be told with this? And I am immediately like a story about Lucifer the Spectre and Eclipso could be awesome. Like,
Yeah.
like their history together and how like they're kind of like in some way siblings, if you look at it a certain way. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's crazy
It's cool.
that I
It's
don't
cool.
know this connection.
Yeah, it's cool because the Spectre's always kind of been vaguely connected to that. Like, you've always had Lucifer there. So I like the idea of taking what you could have already vaguely headcanoned as like little connections and just being like, no, these are all connected. Eclipso is this fallen angel. And I like that because, like you said, there is an opening there to do something with that, right? There is an opening there to have a really interesting story there built from those characters.
Right. And
Like, it
then
opens up those paths.
even now sitting here, like my brain is now firing. It's just like, well, Hal Jordan was the Spectre for a little while. So how
Yeah.
did he play into it? Like, did he, did he get, did he know their entire history together? Did Hal Jordan experience what it was like to be like through timey-wimey stuff? And, like, does he know what it was like to be kicked out of heaven?
Does he
You
get the
know?
Yeah,
knowledge of
no,
the Spectre?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
yeah,
know. I also remember though that Hal was trying to make the Spectre instead of a spirit of vengeance. I remember there was a plot point he was trying to make it spirit of redemption.
Right. Yeah.
mhm,
That was like a
yeah,
huge thing, right? And so that fits in with like, just the good old nature of Hal Jordan. As a non Hal Jordan fan, like that part I think was cool. I think Hal's best parts was not when he was a Green Lantern. That's me. Like going evil
that's
as
fair.
Parallax when he was Spectre. I like that part.
My favorite Hal Jordan stuff, funny enough, is the Grant Morrison Green Lantern run. I think
The
that that
Green
is,
Lantern?
yeah, the Green Lantern.
Oh.
That run, I think that run is fantastic,
I never read it.
incredibly fun. I think
I
it's really good. Yeah, what were you
Around the
gonna say,
time
Jake?
that season two was finishing up, I went back and tried to read it from the beginning, and I still just I was lost. I had no idea what was happening.
I had to start it 3 times before I started to figure things out. And then
Yeah.
as I did, it's the same thing it is for a lot of Grant Morrison books for me, where I'm like, I start off first, I'm utterly confused. I go at it a second time, kind of confused, feeling it a little bit better. Than the third time, I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. And that's kind of how it was for me. Where as soon as I got it, I was like, oh, this is a classic for me.
Yeah.
Like bringing back all these old. They do such a great job of taking all of the Silver Age stuff, all before Jeff Johns' emotional spectrum stuff, and making it all feel so relevant to the rest of the Green Lantern history, and bringing it back in a really interesting way, while also just like furthering Hal as an interesting character and
Mm.
commenting on like what the Green Lanterns are and all this stuff and his relation to them. I think that Grant Morrison did a phenomenal job with that.
Mm.
So I can't recommend that story enough.
Um, After this page, we do get into Green Lantern lore, which for me personally, the DC universe to me kicks off with Green Lantern lore. Like in
Yeah.
my own head, I don't need to go much further than that, but they do go over Green Lantern lore. I'm trying to bring the page up, but and again, these are all preview pages, so I don't have all the pages that go forward. In fact, I think there's 2 more after this. But I love, because here's the thing, there was Secret Origins of the JLA. I have an old trade of it, and again, I grew up with like reading these type of things, like talking about the storylines and stuff like that. And so Secret Origins of the JLA had a chapter on Green Lantern, and it kind of like cursory went through like the Guardians, the Starheart, Alan Scott getting it, then Hal Jordan getting his thing. But this was kind of cool as a Green Lantern fan. This page and the next page, like, I'm glad they had it.
There are now, since the endless are part of the universe, like for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There is a detail here that's not included because it would be to get into in the weeds, but I have to mention it every time anybody talks about uh, uh, the creation of
This,
Oa and
uh-huh.
everything, and that's that the Sandman Dream used to date the spirit that is at the heart of Oa, um, before she was a star. he is the reason why she became like an actual the willpower. He's the reason why she became the flame in the because he upset her.
Oh,
I did not know that. That's so
It's
interesting.
it's
Actually, that fits in a very
she
poetic way
becomes a
for the Green
Starheart,
Lanterns.
yeah, I guess
or
that's
it's
what it is.
Oa, or the star itself.
It's like so he goes on a date. He brings her as his date to a party many years and years ago. Um, yeah, it's like a humanoid version, like an anthropomorphic star. And he takes her on a date, and then like she ends up getting kind of um taken away from him
Uh-huh.
because somebody else like woos her away. And he is notably very vain and jealous. He gets upset by this, and then he makes her so angry that she just decides, I don't have time for this. And then she goes and becomes like the flame at the heart of the star that Oa is like the that Oa goes around.
Mm.
So
That's
she
so interesting.
so she's it's the same story where his sister Despair is runs into the anthropomorphized spirit of Rao, the Kryptonian star, and is
Mm.
just like,
Oh.
dude, do you know what would be crazy if you raised this whole like solar system and then one day just destroyed everybody? And so like Despair from the Endless is responsible for the creation of Superman.
That's so
Uh,
interesting too, and
I'm
that's
looking
why
it up,
I
by the
love
way. Is it
these
Kalala?
inclusions.
Uh,
Kalala of the Glow. This is what I'm looking up.
yes, that's what it is. Yeah.
She is an ancient Malthusian, which they go over in this. So she is essentially like one of the guardians, kind of, but it's before they could harness any of that magic. Um, and she is the first one to exhibit the glow. I don't know what else happens.
Yeah, it's
Maybe I'll watch a TikTok video on
there you go.
it to learn everything there is to know.
I think it's interesting though because like the Endless have always vaguely been a part of DC lore, but I think it's interesting to now go back and see it so concrete and look at all the way. Like I said, I like looking at all the things that connect, maybe in ways writers didn't intend for them to,
Yeah,
because that ends up happening a lot, especially with Green Lantern lore. There's always little things that people didn't pay attention to, and you're like, oh, that actually fits really well. And you
yeah,
look at it all together, and I think especially with stuff like that, it's interesting how much that connects in such a smooth way.
yeah. I mean, I like it to an extent, but then sometimes like the Flash created the Still Force, the Sage Force, the Strength Force, the Speed Force, and like the Speed Force we knew, and I'm like, we don't have to keep extrapolating because it's bad enough we have the forces, but we also the forces are the worst, I think. But like we also have the green, the red, the rot, the whatever. Those are cool. But then we have the emotional spectrum. That's another thing on top of all these like things. And are any of them overlapping? We're not quite sure, right? And like, okay, then there's the avatars of the emotional spectrum. And like, are they gods? Are they not? What happens there? So I kind of like that this issue doesn't really need to go into all that because they're like, we're going to leave this for.
Right.
If it's not
Yeah.
stated in this, it could either exist or not exist.
Right.
The Green Lantern stuff is pretty straightforward, though. Like what they do with the Green Lantern in these pages. Like
Mhm.
Guardians harness all the power or all the the magic, the stray magic in the universe. They create the Starheart. They create the Manhunters. Then they create the Green Lantern Corps. But then the Controllers, which are a splinter group, create the Dark Stars. And then the Malthusians, the women go off and become Zamorons. That's I don't know whether that's a retcon or not, but
I have no idea.
I
so
don't believe that's a retcon. No, I think it's a bunch of pieces that have been touched on, but just like kind of gluing them together.
okay. So it is what it is. Um, but then we get the next page, which is the fourth world stuff, which I have my opinions about the fourth world.
I am just in general a big fan of all the Fourth World Jack Kirby stuff. I think that they touched on this well. This is one of those areas I wish they went a little bit more in depth on, but it comes back to the thing where that's just a personal thing for me, and it doesn't like ruin this at all. Like I think they hit it right where they need to. It's just I'm always like a sucker for Kirby stuff, so I like to see it just all thrown together with giant, walls of text going over everything. But I think they hit it as well as they should.
Drew, do you know my big thing about Fourth World stuff?
I've only heard you say that you think that Jack Kirby was a hack and you think that everything that he ever did was garbage.
You think
And
he sucks? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, well, King Kirby,
I
King Kirby is short for hacking hacking Kirby.
I distinctly remember you saying one time on Comic Talk that Stan Lee was right about everything and everything that he ever did, and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were posers. I heard you say that.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Well, I don't know. We'll have to, for anyone out there who's watching us live or listening to the podcast, yeah, go back and watch previous episodes and try to find that.
Watch all of them and try to find that exact.
No, my big problem is I do not like, and this goes for Marvel, DC, whatever. I do not like when a character or whatever is outside the multiverse, because what that means is all incarnations of that character are the same character, and it makes no sense. I do not think the Fourth World should be outside the multiverse, because that means every Darkseid character that's ever existed is all Darkseid, which means Tiny Titans Darkseid is the same as like DC Superpower Girls Darkseid, which is the same as like Darkseid of the Smallville like universe. Also, like it doesn't make any sense.
I'm actually really glad you brought this up because I think this is a very interesting conversation about this stuff. So when it comes to like Darkseid and the New Gods, the reason it works well for me is because I think that the way that the New Gods above the multiverse works is that they are like archetypal concepts, right? Like I look at Final Crisis, right? And everything that goes on with that. These guys are above the multiverse in a way that is everything below them is almost like their shadow. Like imagine the New Gods are a person and we are their shadow. Everything they do reflects down onto us, which is obviously who wants to get into all that.
This is you channeling Final Crisis lore, right?
This is me channeling Final Crisis lore. But I do think that the thing that works for me is that when you look at it through the lens of like, it's always been explained by like Morrison and these other people as like, I believe incantations, where it's like these are sort of shadows of Darkseid, where they can operate on their own and they don't really have like a connection to Darkseid beyond just being his shadow, right? Like each of them on every different universe can be different, right? But they aren't the true version of Darkseid. And I can get why people don't love that personally, right? I think that can get muddy, but on like a meta level of being like, that's really interesting, that's where I tend to love it. From a storytelling point, I can get how that can get annoying, but for me, on like a meta level, I do really love that in the realm of looking at Darkseid as like this archetypal god concept of what like tyranny and war and dictatorship is, and seeing that reflect as like a big splintered thing all throughout the multiverse, each Darkseid in the multiverse being so different.
I just think that's unnecessary because like Superman exists in the multiverse. Like, so then are we to say that Superman as a concept, like all these characters exist as concepts outside the multiverse in a meta way because we're writing it, right? So then they all are shadows of this concept where every adaptation of Superman is a shadow of the concept of Superman and whatever. Like that's one thing I don't like about Morrison is that I don't think that needs, like, I don't think the meta always needs to be here. I don't think we need to say that Jack Kirby is God of the Marvel Universe to know that in the soul of Marvel, Jack Kirby could be God, right? Like,
I think that's totally fair. I think for me, what works is the way that Morrison doesn't explain it through a meta lens, but makes the meta part of the narrative. And for me, I get why that doesn't work for people. For me, I think that Morrison does it in such a careful way that even though it's hard to understand, there is such interest in learning how it works where I can enjoy it on a level of understanding the story, just being like, sure, that makes sense, and moving with it. But also I can find my fascination getting to me and going, I really want to learn exactly how this works,
Yeah.
and getting the enjoyment out of that. For me, like, I can get if it's too messy for people and it feels a bit unnecessary. For me, I like the inclusion of that meta narrative to be something where it's like, you just need to know the basics, but if you want to really get into the nitty gritty of it, feel free to.
Yeah. Drew?
I like Darkseid because he has a stone face and shoots lasers from his eyes, and also he has Michael Ironside's voice.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's my thought on that conversation.
Yeah.
He's cool.
I
Yeah.
love the fourth world though, but I also like the idea that maybe, I don't know, it's not my choice, but maybe if the fourth worlds were different fourth worlds across different adaptations, and then they are linked, sure, but they are just linked anyway through just being owned by DC Comics. I don't know whether we need to make the meta into literal in a way, right?
I agree. I think for me, it's less about needing that to happen, and more about just how well it can be executed. And obviously, that's always going to depend on the person. They might find it messy, but for me, I think that the caution that Morrison approaches it with works for me, because it doesn't feel like there are writers that try to do that kind of thing, and it doesn't work well for me. Where I'm like, you didn't need to try to make it this meta. You didn't need to. In fact, I'm usually against it. But I think that Morrison's caution with it, while trying to still make it blend and feel like a big DC story and making it feel like it's supposed to mean something, I think it's done with such care that it works well for me because of the way it's executed.
I think it's just a matter of, did you like Final Crisis or not?
It's 100% a matter of that, yeah.
I like the fourth world when it's very simple and Shakespearean to me. Like,
yeah, that's fair.
I like, because Superman the Animated Series was the first time I met these characters. And the idea that the two, like, why they haven't done a New Gods movie is beyond me. Like, the Shakespearean aspect of two rulers giving their sons to each other as a pact, but then Darkseid is like, I'm just going to send you to the pits of apocalypse, right? Like, I didn't keep up my end of the bargain other than trading my son away. I really don't give a fuck. I'm Darkseid. I like that. And I like the fact that they are gods as concepts in a way. Like Fastback is a god of speed, but he's not the god of speed. He's just like the new god of speed, you know? But
yeah,
other than this, I like everything that's like, the new gods are part of this.
Yeah, and I think being able to explain it on the level they did, they kept it simple in the way that it needs to be, without going too deep into the weeds of it all.
Right, because Black Racer is not the same as Black Flash, and he's not the same as Death from The Endless.
Right, all different things, and you could go into it, and it's interesting, but no need for this, you know?
Yeah. As far as like free images, I think that's the end of our thing there. But I mean, there's a lot of pages in this. We're not going to get enough time to do this. But what it does is all these rest of these pages, now that we have the fourth world, we get the development of the green and whatever. We get like weird ancient Atlantis stuff with Eclipso. Then it gets into like ancient Egypt stuff. Then it gets into like Knights of the Shining Armor lore. Then it gets into like, it created some new teams like the Demon. Are the Demon Knights a new team?
Yeah, they were. That was a New 52 book. It was Paul Cornell.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like I think it was a launch title for New 52. With Etrigan was like the main character, but it took place in the medieval period, and it was really just like an excuse for him to do a fantasy book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, we get Ra's al Ghul, we get Gorilla City, we get the pirates, we get the vampires and the shade, we get Frankenstein's monster, then we get into like colonial time Revolutionary War heroes like Miss Liberty. We get then, boom, Icon, which again, that's the biggest thing to me. Then we get Max Mercury and the Cowboys, and it just kind of goes from there. I mean, as we're like finishing up this episode, because we've been talking about this, like, what are your guys' favorite things to have seen in this? Like, this whole issue, let's just say.
There's a lot of stuff in here that's just like characters I have never heard of.
Exactly.
because they just don't really get used. There are a lot of like golden age character, like that. There's that first, uh, I think it's the first double page spread of just like, hey, here's a bunch of characters that you have never heard of, like Ladybug and Betsy Ross and
Oh,
Molly.
those are specifically. Do you know what those characters are from? I've talked about it before. No, it's from
No.
Stargirl and the Lost Children. So what they
Oh, okay.
so it kind of spun off because DC was trying to do the new Golden Age after Flashpoint Beyond. So then they had a couple of other titles like Stargirl, the Lost Children, and then the other miniseries that were like Alan Scott,
Gotcha.
Jay
So
Garrick.
these are new characters.
Yeah, but they're quote unquote new. And what they did was these are because the Justice Society didn't have sidekicks. They created sidekicks that said, yeah, they've always had sidekicks, but those sidekicks were plucked out of time and forgotten about. Like,
Okay.
they were smoothed over. So nobody, like, Jay Garrick didn't remember that he had a daughter. And that's where the Jay Garrick, The Flash miniseries, was about. It was about him getting his daughter back, but now he's an old man. And it kind of sucks. It's the old man and his time displaced daughter and how that goes around, right? So all these characters were quote unquote always around, and they do this
Gotcha.
cool thing with the backup kind of stuff is that they create fake issues. They were in, All-Star Squadron number 5, and it's like you look at it and they're not there because they've been plucked out of time. That's what that spread is. I wish I had that to bring up.
That makes sense to me because yeah, like I had never heard of these characters like Little Boy Blue and the Blue Boys, like
And
they introduced a lot of them. It was a decent chunk amount of sidekicks too. So it
Yeah.
wasn't even like a few here or there. It was like a decent amount of them being introduced all at once.
But they're also named and treated like they were created in the 40s. Like
Yeah.
with these cheesy
Cherry
type
Bomb
of
and these names.
yeah, like Ladybug is the sidekick of Red Bee, and Red Bee is also a forgotten hero. And like
Yeah.
you have Salem is a witch who's a sidekick of Dr. Fate. TikTok is Our Man's sidekick. Quiz Kid is Mr. Terrific sidekick. You get like other like characters that are like lost sidekicks to these Justice Society characters. And slowly but surely they've been introducing them into other titles. Quiz Kid and Mr. Terrific's lost son are like best friends now at like Terrifitech or whatever in the comics.
okay.
There was also talk, I believe, about them getting some kind of spin-off book, if I'm not wrong here. I think it ended up falling through, but they were creating art for it. And I remember there being some talk about that about maybe like a year ago. So they were planning on continuing on all this, like keep it going with all these characters.
Yeah, but the problem is the new Golden Age was supposed to be a lot bigger than it was. It was supposed to be this huge imprint, and DC didn't follow through on it. And so all these characters were probably, meant to be continued. But,
Yeah. Yeah. Weird too, because it seems like people enjoyed it. I guess it just wasn't the overbearing love you were hoping for, but people seem to like it.
Yeah. They do introduce some new... They do like a lot of World War II lore in this issue. Pre-World War II lore. They have like 2 things dedicated to the freedom fighters. But they also bring in like the All-Star Squadron and the Young All-Stars. I think the fully new team that they bring in is the Justice Society Dark.
Yes. Yeah, this was an interesting one. It was one that I understand why they went with. I just didn't expect it. But I do like that inclusion. I think it's interesting to try to give the idea of the Justice League Dark a backtracked history of like reoccurring teams. Because even before the Justice League Dark, I'm blanking on the name of the team, but there was a
Shadow
magic.
Pact?
Yeah, Shadow Pact. So there was that. Like you had a based magic team already. So I do like this in general. I almost kind of wish maybe Shadow Pact was the replacement there of like some kind of extended thing where this was an earlier team of Shadow Pact or whatever. But I like the inclusion of trying to make this seem like a bigger timeline thing. Like this is a bigger there's a bigger history to this kind of team than just being here's a spinoff of the Justice League that we thought of and they're magic based. I like trying to do that.
There's also a thing that like DC loves its branding. So like I love the name Shadow Pact but like branding wise, like they're probably like, well, who's gonna pick up a book Shadow Pact if they don't know what it is? Instead, let's call it Justice League Dark, and that's kind of what Shadow Pact became, right? Was Justice League Dark, and then in the pages of Teen Titans Academy, they create Young Justice Dark, as like a club, and then in this, it's Justice Society Dark. I think they're just capitalizing on that name brand recognition. Same with creating the Justice Alliance with Captain Comet, which I think was an alternate multiversal team that they're now like brought in, and they just want that justice, right?
They do, and it works for me. Like, I think that the biggest thing to me is kind of back for like what Drew said earlier, where it's like, if you're going to include these new pieces of information, I like that to open up doors to more stories or interesting things. And even though, it's a Justice League team, of course we're going to get stories to that if you're trying to pop that into the lore. I like specifically the idea of a Justice Society Dark. I think that that's a fun avenue to go down to try to explain that lore and talk about what that team consisted of. Because one of the big things about the Justice Society I love is just how big the team is and how much there is to all of that. And I like the idea of being like, well, now it's in a writer's hands to be like, how big you want that to actually be? What do you want that to look like? What do those stories look like? And I just kind of like opening up those avenues.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of side characters in this, but what they're doing also is like setting up for Creature Commandos, setting up for Suicide Squad. They also bring in the World War II Losers, which is a spiritual prequel to the modern Vertigo Losers, which they did a movie on, which is funny, but
they did.
Little known DC book. But
they did that again. I think it's not on that same page, but it's in the war stuff. It's on the page before it. The Unknown Soldier was a DC war book in the 70s. And then they did a Vertigo version of it much later.
Oh, okay.
In the early 2000s. And they're like not connected, but the concept is the same.
Well, same with Suicide Squad, right? Like that was like a spiritual, like a sequel, but then they do bridge it with Rick Flag Sr. and Jr. Yeah.
And then they bring up the Suicide Squadron, right? Is that what they called it there, right? With Rick Flag Sr. Yeah.
That nickname, which it would have been, I mean, it was called the Suicide Squad. It was published, so I don't know if that's just a new term for it for this book, and like going forward they're going with the distinction. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I mean, other than like Milestone is bound to come back, those Milestone characters are bound to come back with the inclusion of Icon in this. Like, I doubt they're gonna drop Icon here and then just say that like Virgil Hawkins doesn't exist. Like, come on. Like, and he needs to be on the Teen Titans.
Part of the Teen Titans.
Yeah, exactly. We're on the same page. What I do find interesting is everything is steeped in history up until one point. So you deal with the JSA dealing with, and by the way, Hippolyta is the first Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I was very interested by that because I don't know if that's a new thing. It was something I had never heard before.
It's a new and old thing. In post-crisis, they do have that Hippolyta was the Justice Society through time, something or another. And then now they're like, then they said it wasn't, and then now they're back to being, it is.
Also, the thing about like Themyscira is the reincarnations of women who were murdered. Like,
that's a recent storyline. That is.
Is that, if I'm not wrong, is that the John Burns Wonder Woman?
No,
if I'm not wrong?
It's even more recent. It's like Nubia and the Amazons and that sort of thing does that.
Okay.
Because we get Wonder Woman, the Historia, Amazon, whatever. Wonder Woman, Historia, the Amazons. Like, that doesn't touch on the well, but the well itself is in Nubia and the Amazons and other titles that are around that time. But essentially, it is women's souls who were murdered or like wronged and whatnot, right? By man's world, essentially getting away from man's world and having safety in like its sort of reincarnated afterlife, that is, Themyscira. But what I find interesting is the JSA, they don't say it's the House of Un-American Activity. in this, but this is the communist Red Scare stuff that the Justice Society are on trial for, and then it says that they disappear for years. So that's, I think, the Ragnarok stuff. I think that was part of, like, you know, modern Justice Society stuff, is they were lost decades and then they came back later. Then they say the Justice Alliance takes their place just for a very short run. But then that's all steeped in history. Then they just say decades after the Justice Society vanished. You don't know how many decades. That's the jump in time, so things aren't bogged down in like the Vietnam War or whatever. Like, we don't know. It just says decades after. There's the Supermen Project, which is kind of hearkening to Doomsday Clock, which Doomsday Project has, or the Superman Project has Niles Calder, Will Bagness, Martin Stein, and Simon Stagg, all of characters that are alive now. So they couldn't have been doing it for that long. They're old men, but like, they're not dead. So we get a nondescript time. Then we get Martian Manhunter getting pulled to Earth right before Krypton explodes. And that's all we get for issue number 1.
Yeah. And I think it's beautifully wrapped up. I think that, like we said earlier, ending off on the note of the introduction of Superman is very strong. And especially so much compacted history, like you said, looking at that hourglass, all funneling to this one moment makes that moment feel so special. And like for me, if you're going to go the route of Superman not being the first superhero, totally fine with that. You just got to make it feel good. You have to make it feel earned. And I think this is as earned as it can feel.
Right. Sometimes it's not always who is the first to do it. It's who does it the best, the most impactful, right? And Superman is that person, you know?
Yeah.
A lot going on in this book. And I mean, this is really a DC fans book, not necessarily not necessarily like if you're a fan of like Justice League characters, maybe like this issue is not necessarily for you.
There's even so many characters in this that I didn't know, where I was going like, I don't know who these Wild West guys are. I feel like I should know, and it's like, even for a super DC fan, half the time I'm like looking up these names.
Yeah. Which is part of the fun for us. Yeah. But also, like, I'm just not a fan of, like, the Knights in Shining Armor stuff or the Wild West cowboy stuff. I'm not a fan of that. So I never really, like, jumped really into it. But there are a lot of Wild West characters because those comics were a genre of comics. Wild West comics were, like, their own genre. And, like, those characters created were their own... They were the megastars of that time period when, like, those comics were around.
Yeah. And I think if you're going to establish such a long timeline of events, I feel like not only is it good to obviously cover those events, but now people who are fans of that genre, who are like, hey, I'm a DC guy, but I'm also like a guy who loves all this old Western stuff. There's a whole area for you there. There's a whole area for you to go in and dive deep into.
Yeah. I'm happy with this one. I don't know what else there is to say, but
yeah, I liked it a lot. I think it hit everything it should hit. And I'm just more so fascinated by where they're going to go next. Obviously, it's going to go down the timeline, but just how much of the timeline this next issue is going to cap up to.
Yeah. Well, because I'm a big thing that, like, DC, fundamentally, the thesis of the DC universe is legacy. Like, if you have to boil it down to one word, it's legacy. DC doesn't work starting at ground zero. It just doesn't, because there's no legacy. Like, why would it, like, the universe exists on inspiring the next generation. One, like, A leads to B leads to C, and, like, the impact of, like, someone. So it's like legacy is super important. That's why the Robins are super important to Batman, I think, to Batman lore. And same goes with, like, the Wild West characters that we forget about, sure. But, like, no matter what, there will always be a hero. I think that's also like a point in DC.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like this entire first issue really establishes that, because I think even if you're somebody who's not a big active DC reader, you are seeing how much connectivity there is between these things. Like, I was reading just people talking about this whole thing, and there's people who are like, Mr. Terrific's a legacy character? And it's like, yeah. And it's so cool to watch people go, I had no idea about these connections, and going through and reading about it and being like, I had no idea, the Atom was a legacy character, or this or this or that. And I think there's a fun in going back and reading about those legacies that you didn't know much about as well.
Right. I mean, the fact is Ted Kord is a legacy character because people forget about Dan Garrett, but their legacy characters, their choices and their complications live on, and I think that's as a writer, that's kind of what you can focus on with DC, is the fact that the Guardians doing their like shady shit in the beginning of the universe leads to problems now for the Green Lantern lore, right? And even in the back of the book, they talk about Arkham Asylum and all that stuff. That affects Gotham now, and you need that.
It's that butterfly effect, and when you see it all happen, like I said, for me, it comes back to having that history. Not having that history doesn't ruin a story for me, but it enhances it. It can enhance it, and I think when you look at it all, because for me, DC history is one of the most important and interesting things about DC. Having all that knowledge and looking through these things and understanding where it started and what are these butterfly effects makes things so much more exciting for me. They don't take anything away, but they are such a thrill to be able to read about and learn about and apply that to what you know about the legacies and knowledge you already had about these characters.
Yeah, definitely agree. Do you guys have final thoughts before we get out of here?
Just a great first issue. I loved it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where it goes. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I know where it's gonna go, but it's just how it's presented. You know what I'm saying?
I'm interested in how they're gonna break issues 2, 3, and 4. Is 4 gonna go into the future, or is it going to go to present day? And is present day worth going over if we've literally already experienced absolute power? Do we need to go over absolute power? Or are they going to go into the future of because Flash lore goes into the future. Are we going to see multiple different types of timelines in the future? Is Terry McGinnis going to pop up? Even the life story of the Flash went a little bit into the future. So it's it hinted at things. Are we going to get some of that? Who knows? But
maybe.
I think that this, as a DC fan, these 4 issues are super important. So that's why this episode is just on issue 1, and I'm hoping next month we can do issue 2 and 3 and then 4, right? And so we'll see. This will be a little 4-part series that kind of ties in together. But I want to thank you guys so much for coming on here and taking time out of your Sunday to be here. Before we go and Drew, where can we find you? What do you got coming up? Anything you want to plug?
You can find me on social medias, wherever. TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, just Drew X Deficit. That's where I am. I'm working on new comics right now. I've been kind of posting some previews of that stuff across different places. So if you're interested in that, and then find me at San Diego Comic-Con.
Awesome. I'll be there as well. Good stuff. Jack, where can we find you? What do you got coming up? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, you guys can find me on TikTok, YouTube. That's where I'm primarily at. Later on this summer, we're going to be releasing the trailer of our Batman fan film, so be on the lookout for that. And just more content in general to come.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Both you guys do great content, so anyone out there who's not following you guys is missing out. So
thank you.
If anyone wants to find me personally, sorry, what'd you say?
I said they should also just send me money.
Yeah, they should do that. Why not?
Yeah, good point.
For anyone who's not following me, who wants to follow me personally, aside from the Keeg, I'm at This Is Dimithri on Instagram and whatnot. But for all the Keeg stuff, at the Keeg Show on social media, TikTok and Instagram are 2 biggest ones. At the Keeg Show or / the Keeg Show, everywhere, Blue Sky and Threads and all that stuff. TikTok and Instagram are our biggest ones. This right here is the Keeg Talks. It's one of our many shows. We also got Comic Talk on Thursdays. We got the Keeg Chats, where I do one-on-one interviews. So most recently with writer Tim Sheridan. I recommend checking that out. If you're watching us live, you're watching us on youtube.com/The Keeg Show, or to a lesser degree, twitch.tv/The Keeg Show, or you're listening to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, SoundCloud. We're on all of those. However you guys digest us, whether it's watching or listening or whatever, like, comment, subscribe, follow. Let us know you're out there, write a review, so on and so forth. Go on Instagram, share what we post, that sort of thing. It's the Keeg and at the Keeg Show every single place. Go to comicshoplocator.com, find a comic shop near you, one that you vibe with, one that you connect with, one that you can pick up any of these comics from, including the new History of the DC Universe issue number 1. Also support your local public libraries. That's also super important. I think that's pretty much it. There's a lot of things out there, let's spread the positivity. We're all part of the same comic book community. Nobody needs to be King Geek. We can all just kind of share our love. It's way better than sharing our hate, That's pretty much it. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Jack, so much yet again. We got a Fantastic Four 101 podcast that I'm going to be doing in less than an hour, so, stay tuned for that. But yes, everybody else, thank you so much. Once again, I am your host, Dimithri Pereira, and this has been the Keeg Talks, the new History of the DC Universe, issue number 1. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Nice, guys.
Super fast, gotta beat the boss and get the loot, cause it's the King, and we got geek news.